Why, hello. I am Big Joe the Storyteller. Now, usually I tell regular stories, but today, because it is close to Halloween time, I'm going to tell you some spooky stories. We're going to tell you some stories that are spooky. No, that's not spooky enough. Let's see. That's better. That's better. In the story, there could be a witch. There may be a spider. Yeah. There could be a vampire bat. Oh, look at that. Look at that. There could be a ghost. Oh, my goodness. There could be skeletons. Yeah. Or there can be. I don't know where the monkey came from. I don't know. I don't know where the monkey came from. But stories will be spooky, but not too scary. So everyone can enjoy the show, whether you're little, big, young, or old. You can enjoy the story. We're going to tell you some stories today. I have 4 big spooky stories for you this video, and you will get to have some fun. Now, our very, very, very first story is a story about a haunted house. The story is called The Door at the Top of the Stairs, and I'll tell it to you. Now, this story is only a little bit spooky, okay? And as we go, it's going to get a little more spooky, then a little more spooky, and then something very spooky at the very end. Our last story is going to be very spooky. It's a story about, well, you'll see when we get there. It's going to be kind of spooky. But our very first story is not that spooky. It's a little bit spooky. And this story is called The Door at the Top of the Stairs. Now, once upon a time, there were 2 brothers named Henry and James. And Henry and James lived in a mouse hole in the basement of a very big human house. Now, some people say that house was haunted. But Henry and James didn't care. They had lots of fun. Every day they would have lots of fun in the house. They would play with the old toys, climb up the old furniture, and run across the basement floor. But there was one place they could never, ever go, and that was the door at the top of the stairs. Their mother and father told them never, ever, ever go near the door at the top of the stairs. Well, one day Henry and James were playing ball, and they were rolling the ball back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and the ball took a very bad bounce. It rolled and it rolled and it rolled and it rolled right to the bottom step. Well, they went to get it, and when they got there, they looked up and up and up, and there was the door at the top of the stairs. And Henry said, "Look, there's the door." And James said, "Oh, I don't like that door. I don't like that door at all." And Henry said, "Oh, there's nothing to be afraid of." He said, "Yes, there is. Mom and Dad said that there's a monster on the other side of that door." He said, "Oh, come on, there's no such thing." He said, "Yes, there is. Come on, let's just go home. Let's go back home." He said, "No, you know what? I think we should go and see what's up there." I said, "I don't know. I don't think that we should." He said, "What's the matter? Are you chicken?" I said, "I'm not chicken, I'm a mouse." He said, "No, you know what I mean. Are you scared?" He said, "Yeah, I'm scared. I don't want to go up there." He said, "Come on, it'll be fine." Well, even though he didn't want to go, he followed his brother. And they went up 1 step. Then they went up 2 steps. Then they went up 3 steps. Then they went up 4 steps. When they got to step number 4, the boards creaked under their paws. And James said, "Oh, Henry, come on, let's go home. Let's go home." He said, "No, come on, it'll be fine." And so they went up step number 5, step number 6, step number 7, step number 8. When they got to step number 8, it was very dark and dusty. And when James went to sniff, he got the dust up his nose. And he went, achoo! Whoa, oh my goodness. Achoo! Whoa. Achoo! And Henry said, "Be careful." He said, "Okay." And so they went up step number 9, step number 10, step number 11, step number 12, unlucky step number 13. And every step they took got them closer and closer to the door at the top of the stairs. And James said, "Oh, Henry, what if it's a bad monster? What if it's a mean monster? What if it's a really scary monster?" He said, "Come on, there's no such thing." And so they went up step number 14. Step number 15, step number 16, till there was 1 step left. And James said, "Okay, Henry, look, I can see the door. There it is. Let's go home." He said, "Oh, come on. There's only 1 step left." And they went up the very last step. And they stood right in front of the door at the top of the stairs. And the door was big and gray and cracked. And there was a beam of light coming from under the door. And Henry said, "I wonder what's over there." And James said, "I already know. It's the monster. It's the monster." He said, "Come on, let's go and see." He said, "I don't know. I don't think that we should. And James was shaking and shivering. He said, come on, brother, it'll be fine. Let's go. He didn't really want to go, but he followed his older brother, and they wiggled and wriggled underneath the door and came up on the other side. And when they got there, that's when they saw it. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. There were rugs on the floor, paintings on the wall, chandeliers on the ceiling. He said, see, silly, I told you there's nothing to be afraid of. And then they turned around. And when they turned around, there behind them stood the monster. And the monster looked at Henry and James, and the monster said one word. Meow. And Henry and James went, ah! And they went in the door, and they tumbled and bubbled and bubbled and tumbled and ran all the way back home. And when they got back home, they locked the door tight. And from that day on, they went on many, many adventures, but they never, ever went near the door at the top of the stairs ever again. And that is the end. See, that story wasn't that spooky, was it? That just to kind of get you ready, get you prepared for what's coming up. That was a little bit spooky. So the monster ended up being a cat, wasn't it? It was a little bitty cat. So our next story is a story that you're all going to help me out with, okay? I'm going to need your help. Now, there are 3 things I want to tell you about this next story. Thing number 1, this is a tale that you will get to help me out with, okay? Now, you can do this from right where you are, right where you're watching this video. You can do this and you can help out with this story, okay? You can do this story on your own right there at home when you're watching this video. Thing number 2, this is a teaching tale. Now, if you remember this story and you remember the story, how it goes, then you could tell it to your friends and your family. If you have cousins or aunts and uncles, you could tell them this story and you can creep them out too. And the last part of this story, the last part about this story is in this story, you may have heard this story if you've ever been to camp or if you've been to scouts, if you've done anything like that, you might know this story, okay? I heard this story at a Cub Scout jamboree a long time ago. And the way they told this story is different from the way I'm going to tell the story, okay? And I'll tell you at the end of the story how I heard the story for the very first time. It was different than I heard it. The way I tell it is much, much spookier. And I'll tell it to you. Now, this story is a story about a graveyard. There it is. I had to bring it up there. It's a story called The Voice in the Graveyard. Okay? Now, I'm going to need your help in this story. And there are 4 sounds I need to help me make in this story, okay? Now, the first sound is going to be the sound of the rusty gate. Now, the rusty gate's going to sound like this. It's going to go like this. Sounds good? All right, now let's see if we could all try it together. Ready? We're all going to do it together. Ready? Excellent. Now, the next sound is the sound of the howling wind. And the howling wind is going to sound like this. Y'all got that? All right, let's do it again. Ready? Here we go. Now, the next sound is the sound of the crunching leaves, because this time of year, there's a lot of leaves all over the ground. They crunch when you walk on them. And the crunching leaves are going to sound like this. Crunch, 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 crunch. Very good. Should we try that all together? All right, let's do it all together. Ready? Crunch, 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 crunch. Excellent. Now, the last sound is the most important sound. It's the spooky voice. It's 3 words said 2 times, and it goes like this. Turn me over. Turn me over. You got it? All right, let's do it together. Ready? Here we go. Ready? Turn me over. Turn me over. You're ready for the story called The Voice in the Graveyard. Now, once upon a time, there was a man and his wife, and they lived in a little house. And they lived right next to a very big graveyard. Now, in that house, there was a man and his wife and their little baby. Ew. 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 You're a very gassy baby. Now, as I told you, next to the little house was a very big graveyard where many people have been buried for many years. Now, the graveyard was so big that when they left their house, if they had to go around the graveyard, it would take them a very, very long time to get where they were going. So what they would do is cut right through the middle of the graveyard to get to the other side very quickly. Now, every day the man would go off to work, and every night he would come home to be with his wife and little gassy baby. Now, during the spring and during the summer, that was kind of easy because it stays light pretty late. But during this time of year, it gets dark very early. In fact, by the end of this month, it's going to get dark really early. And going through a graveyard when it's dark was not the greatest thing in the world. Well, one day, late in October, the man was coming home from work, and he got up to the graveyard gate. Now, get ready, friends. And he grabbed hold, and he opened up the rusty gate. He walked through, and it was a very quiet night. He couldn't hear much. All he heard was the sound of the howling wind. He walked down the path, and as he did, the leaves crunched under his feet. Crunch, 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 crunch. And then when he got to the middle of the graveyard path, he heard a spooky voice. Ready? Turn me over. Turn me over. And he ran the rest of the way home. When he got back home, he saw his wife. He said, "Wife, there's something in the graveyard. There's something in the graveyard." And his wife did to him what my wife does to me. She rolled her eyes. Oh, boy. She said, "Oh, foolish man." She said, "There is nothing in the graveyard. You're just being foolish. Now stop being foolish." He said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm just being foolish." Well, when he went to bed that night, he didn't think much about it. When he woke up the next morning, he didn't think much about it. And during the day at work, he didn't think much about it. But when he got home that night, he thought a little bit about it. He got up to the graveyard fence there, and he was thinking about it. He said, "Ooh, what if there's something in there?" But then he thought, "Nah, you know what? I'm just being silly. It's just my imagination." And so he grabbed hold, and he opened up the rusty gate. He walked down the path, and he listened to see if he could hear anything strange or out of the ordinary, but all he heard was the howling wind. He walked down the path, and the leaves crunched under his feet. Crunch, 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 crunch. And then when he got to that very same spot that he was before, he heard the spooky voice. Turn me over. Turn me over. And again, he ran the rest of the way home. And he got home. When he got home, he said, "Wife, there's something in the graveyard. There's something in the graveyard. I know there is. There really is." But again, his wife rolled her eyes. Oh, boy. She said, "Oh, foolish man." She said, "There is nothing in the graveyard. You're just being foolish. Now stop being foolish." He said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm just being foolish." Well, when he went to bed that night, he thought a little bit about it. When he woke up the next morning, he thought a little bit about it. During the day at work, he thought a little bit about it. And when he got home that night, when he got up to the graveyard fence, he thought a whole lot about it. He said, "You know what? You know what? I'm not even going to go through the graveyard. I'm just going to go around the graveyard. That's it. I'm just going to go around. That's it." But then he thought to himself, "Nah, that's silly. I'll be okay. I'm fine." And so he grabbed hold and he opened up the rusty gate. He walked through and he listened really, really hard to see if he could hear anything strange. But all he heard was that howling wind. He walked down the path and the leaves crunched under his feet. Crunch, 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 crunch. And then when he got to the middle of the graveyard path, he heard that spooky voice. Turn me over. Turn me over. And again, he ran the rest of the way home. And when he got home, he said, "Wife, please, you have to believe me. You have to. There's something in the graveyard. There's something in the graveyard." And again, his wife rolled her eyes. Oh, she said, "Oh, foolish man, there is nothing in the graveyard. You're just being foolish. Now stop being foolish." He said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm just being foolish." But when he went to bed that night, he didn't think he was being foolish at all. "I'm not foolish. She's foolish. She's really foolish. There's a monkey wearing my pajamas. There's a dog on the roof. Somebody punched a llama." I don't know. He was having weird dreams, really weird dreams. Well, when he woke up that next morning, he thought a whole lot about it. During the day, he thought a whole lot about it. And when he got home at night, he really thought about it, because this was no ordinary night, my dear friends. This was Halloween night. And nobody should be going through a graveyard on Halloween night, especially one where you're hearing a spooky voice. But he got up to the gate. And when he got there, he said to himself, I don't know. I don't know if I should go through. I really don't. But you know what? Even though he was scared, even though he was kind of terrified, part of him had to know. He had to know what was going on. And so he took a deep breath, got all the courage he had, grabbed hold, and opened up the rusty gate. He went through, and he listened really hard to see if he'd hear anything strange, but all he heard was the howling wind. He walked down the path, and the leaves crunched under his feet. Crunch, 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 crunch. And then when he got to that very same spot, he heard the spooky voice. Turn me over. Turn me over. And it was coming from that direction. So he headed down a path in the middle of the graveyard that he had never been down before. And the path was windy and twisty. He got to the end. When he got to the end, there was another fence and another gate. And he grabbed hold and he opened up that rusty gate. And he went through the gate. And beyond the gate, there were steps, stone steps. He went down those dark stone steps. He went down 13 steps, which is a very unlucky number. And when he got to the bottom, the ground was as black as midnight. And there in the middle was a gravestone, but not one of those thin ones like the ones you see right there in front of you, but a big, thick slab of rock with a statue on the top and writing on the front. And he looked at it for a long time. He said, is this where I heard the voice? And as if to answer his question, he heard the spooky voice. Turn me over. Turn me over. And it was coming from the other side of that gravestone. So he got down low on his hands and knees to sneak up on what was ever over there. And he crept along and crept along and crept along. He was just about ready to get to the other side of the gravestone, and he heard the spooky voice. Now we're going to have to do it a little bit louder this time. Ready? Turn me over. Turn me over. And all the courage he had indeed, he went and he looked on the other side of the gravestone. And when he looked on the other side of the gravestone, that's when he saw it. There was a turtle. And the turtle was lying on his back, and the turtle said, turn me over. Turn me over. And he turned the turtle over, and the turtle said, thank you. And he headed off into the grave. Well, the man went back home. And when he got back home, his wife said, well, was there anything in the graveyard? He said, no, I was just being foolish. And from that day on, the man, his wife, and the little gassy baby all lived happily ever after. And that is the end. Now, the way I heard that story the first time, at the end of the story, there wasn't a turtle. It was a hamburger on a grill that wanted to be turned over, which makes no sense. Why would there be a hamburger in a graveyard? No idea. That's why I put it turtle in my story. Now, remember, if you remember that story, if you remember the way it goes and the way that story goes, all the sounds and stuff, you could tell it to your friends and you could tell it to your family, and it'll really creep them out. It's a really creepy kind of story. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you a story now about a monster. This is a monster story. Our next story is called Willie and the Hairy Man. Now, in this story, there's going to be a monster. Now, this is more of a trickster tale, and then not horror, because sometimes monsters are really scary, and it's really like, and you see monster things, and there's a monster hand. See that monster hand? That is too scary. In fact, our last story after this, I'm going to have some monster hands. I have some monster hands here in the studio, and I'm going to show you my monster hands. But that was a monster hand there, and it's not going to be that scary. It's not going to be that intense. It's going to be monsterish. That's not even that. That's kind of a gross monster. But this is a story about a hairy monster. This story is called Willie and the Hairy Man. Let me put on my hat for this story. All right, there I go. Now, once upon a time, way down south, there was a town. In the town, strange things were happening. There were strange noises in the forest. There were strange footprints being left all over the ground. too big to be a wolf, too big to be a bear, too big to be anything anybody had seen. And somebody or something was breaking into all the barns and eating the animals and eating the food. And nobody knew what it was. Nobody could figure it out. There was a boy in that town, his name was Willie. And Willie went over to his mom one day and he said, "Mama, what's making all that noise?" And she said, "Oh, Willie, that is the hairy man." And Willie said, "What's a hairy man?" Said, "A hairy man, he's like a man, only he stands 8 feet tall. And he has long, dark hair all over his body. And he has long, sharp claws and ugly, spiky teeth and eyes that are red like fire. If you're not careful, Willie, he will eat you up." But she said, "I have something to tell you that hardly anybody knows. All you have to do is play 3 tricks on the hairy man, just 3 tricks. And that hairy man has to disappear and leave you alone forever. So just remember, if you ever run into him, just try to play 3 tricks." And he said, "Okay." Well, the next day, Willie went out to go and pick some berries off the berry bushes. He had his berry picking bag, and he went out to go and pick some berries, have a good time. And he was a little afraid of what his mama said, for protection. He took along his dog, Rufus. Now, Rufus was a big old dog with big jaws and big teeth, and he protected Willie. And he was protecting him in the forest. "Har, ar, 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 ar. Come here, boy. Har, ar, ar, ar." And all of a sudden, Rufus saw something in the woods and went chasing off after it. "Ar, ar, 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 ar." Willie said, "Come back. Come back, you stinky dog." But Rufus left and left Willie all by himself. Now, Willie was getting into a dark part of the forest because, you see, down south, the trees get so hot that they hang over each other and they block out the sun. And there are places out there where it looks like it's nighttime, even though it's the middle of the day. And Willie was in one of those dark parts of the forest when all of a sudden he heard some deep breathing behind him. He turned around slowly, and there behind him stood the hairy man, with all that hair, those long, sharp claws, those ugly teeth, those red eyes. And he pointed his claw down at Willie and he said to him, "I'm gonna eat you up." Now, Willie was scared. He didn't know what to do. He knew if he tried to run, the hairy man would catch him. If he tried to hide, he knew the hairy man would find him. And he didn't know what to do, but then he remembered what his mama said about the 3 tricks. And he had to think of something. He thought, came up with a good idea. He looked up at that hairy man. He said to him, "Nah, I'm not afraid of you." And the hairy man said, "What? How come you're not afraid of me?" "So I'm not afraid of you because you don't have any magic powers." And the hairy man said, "Hey, I have plenty of magic powers." He said, "No, you don't. So why I bet you couldn't change into things." He said, "I bet you couldn't change yourself into a cow." And the hairy man said, "No problem." The hairy man went, changed into a cow. And then he changed back. Well, he said, "I was all right, but you know what? I bet you couldn't change yourself into an elephant." He said, "Oh, yeah? Watch this." And the hairy man went, changed into an elephant. And then he changed back. So that was pretty good, but you know what? I bet you couldn't change yourself into a big, tall giraffe. I said, "Yeah? Watch this." And the hairy man went, changed into a giraffe. And then he changed back. Now, here comes the trick. Because he looked up at him. He said, "Yeah, well, changing the big thing seems kind of easy for you. I bet you couldn't change yourself into something small. I bet you couldn't change yourself into a little tiny mouse." And the hairy man said, "No problem." And the hairy man went, changed into a mouse. Well, he did, Willie grabbed him, picked him up by the tail, put him in the bag, tied the bag up really tight, and threw the bag in the river. And he ran all the way back home. He said, "Mama, I did it. I did it. I did it. I tricked the hairy man. I tricked him, and I got rid of him." And she said, "Oh, no, Willie. You might have tricked him once, but you didn't get rid of him. You still have to trick him 2 more times. And that hairy man's going to come back. And when he does, he's going to be even harder to trick than before." And Willie said, "Nah, I'll never see him again." And he was so sure that the next day he went out without Rufus with him. Went out all by himself, down by the river, maybe do a little fishing, do a little swimming, have a little fun. And as he was going, all of a sudden, he heard some deep breathing behind him. He turned around slowly, and there stood the hairy man. And the hairy man looked down and smiled a crooked smile. Willie said, "Hey, how did you get out of the bag?" And the hairy man said, "Please, that was easy. I just changed myself into the wind, and I blew right out of the bag. And now I'm gonna eat you up." Now, Willie had to think of his second trick, and he had to think going really quickly. He needed some time. He looked down at the hairy man's feet. He saw the hairy man's toes were all twisted and curled. He knew because of those curly, twisty toes, he probably couldn't climb a tree too well, and that's how Willie decided to get away. So he grabbed hold of a tree, and he climbed up way high and went up to a top branch and sat up there. And the hairy man looked up at him and said, "Hey, that's okay. You got to come down soon, and when you do, I'm going to eat you up." Now, Willie knew he couldn't stay up there forever, and he had to think of a trick. And he thought. So I got it. He looked down at that hairy man. He said to him, "Nah, I'm still not afraid of you." The hairy man said, "What? How come you're not afraid of me now?" So I'm not afraid of you because you can't make things disappear. He said, "Hey, I can make the whole world disappear if I wanted to." No, you couldn't. So he said, "That rock over there, bet you can't make that rock disappear and end up down by the river." The hairy man stuck out his hand, the rock went, ended up by the river. "Sounds pretty good, but that log over there, bet you can't make that log disappear and end up down by the hills." He said, "No problem." Stuck out his hand, log went, ended up by the hills. "Sounds pretty good, but you see that plant over there, bet you can't make that plant disappear and end up down by the swamp." He stuck out his hand, the plant went, ended up by the swamp. And here comes the trick. If you look down at it, he said to him, "Yeah, well, you see this tree that I'm sitting on right here? I bet you can't make this tree disappear and end up down by my house." And the hairy man said, "No problem." And he stuck out his hand to make the tree disappear. Well, when he stuck out his hand to make the tree disappear, Willie grabbed hold of the tree really tight and he squeezed. And he squeezed tight to the tree. When the hairy man made the tree disappear, Willie disappeared right along with it. And he ran back down. He climbed back down. He said, "Mama, I did it. I did it. I tricked him 2 times. All we got to do is trick him 1 more time." And she said, "Oh, Willie, no one's ever lived long enough to trick him 3 times before we have a good chance to get rid of him." So they sat there and they thought about what to do. They need to say, "We need to come up with a good trick." And they talked and they talked and they figured it out. So I got it. So Willie, go out into the barnyard and get me a pig. I said, "A pig?" "Yeah, just do it." He said, "All right." He went out in the barnyard and came back with the pig. And he brought the pig in, and the pig went oink. Moo! Your line is oink. What? Your line is oink. Oh, sorry. And the pig went oink. Ah, nope. Your line is oink. What? Your line is oink. You have 1 line in the story, it's oink. What? Your line is oink. Oh, gotcha. And the pig went oink. "Hey, I'm Big Joe, the storyteller." Nope. Your line is oink. What? It's oink, right? Because I'm a pig. Okay, gotcha. My bad. You ready? Yes. And the pig went oink. Oink, thank you. Don't mention it. She took the pig and she said to Willie, "Willie, go up in the attic and hide and don't come down and don't make a sound." So Willie climbed the old ladder up to the attic and hid behind some boxes. And Willie's mom got to work. She went on over to Willie's bed and she got a blanket. And she took the pig and she wrapped the pig in the blanket. Pig in a blanket? Ooh, pig in a blanket. Well, she took the pig in the blanket and she put him in Willie's bed. A pig in Willie's bed? Well, all of a sudden, outside, she heard some rumbling. And she said, "Go away, hairy man, go away." And he said, "I'm not leaving. Open the door." She said, "You can't get in here. I have locks all over the door." He said, "I'll break through the locks now. Open the door." She said, "If you get in here, I'm going to light you on fire." He said, "I'll blow out the fire now. Open the door." And even though Willie's mom had a plan, her hand was shaking and her heart was pounding, and she undid the locks and opened up the door. There in the doorway stood the hairy man with all that hair, those long, sharp claws, those ugly teeth, those red eyes. And he pointed his claw down at Willie's mom and he said to her, "I'm here to take Willie." She said, "No way, you're not getting him. You're not getting him at all." He said, "Give me Willie right now, because I'm going to eat him up." She said, "No way, no how." He said, "You give me Willie right now, because I'm going to eat him up." And then Willie's mom did something surprising. She put up her hands and she said, "Okay, hairy man, I'll give you Willie." And Willie was hoping the plan worked. And Willie's mom was hoping that too. She went on over to Willie's bed and she got the pig. And she brought him on over to where hairy man was. And she said, "Okay, hairy man, here you go. Here's Willie." The hairy man took it and he smiled. Huh? Said, "Hey, what's this? What's this?" She said, "Well, hairy man, that is my pig and his name is Willie. So I told you I was going to give you Willie. I never told you which Willie I was going to give you." Well, the hairy man got so tricked that he ran off in the forest yelling and screaming and complaining, and all of a sudden, whap, he was gone. And from that day on, there were no more sounds in the forest, no more footprints on the ground, nobody's eating anything out of the barn. And that was all because of Willie and Willie's mom, who played 3 big tricks and tricked the hairy man. And that is the end. All right. Now I have one more story to tell you. And as I told you, I have some monster hands here in the studio. There's 1 monster hand. There is 2 monster hands. Hang on. Always hard to get these hands on. Hello. Our last story is a story called Bloody Finger. Now, in this story, there may be blood. That was really gross. This story is about blood, but don't worry. As I've said through this whole entire show, this is not going to be too scary, okay? This is just for everyone. the story is perfect for all. The story is called Bloody Finger. Once upon a time, there were three brothers. Three brothers there. And all three brothers had gone for a hike in the woods. They had hiked all day long to enjoy the sights and have some fun and have a wonderful day. Well, as they were going, they started to get a little bit hungry. So they all sat down to eat the food they had packed. The oldest brother had ham and cheese. The middle-sized brother had tuna fish. And the little brother had peanut butter and jelly. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I think it's just because I'm really hungry right now. So they were sitting there eating their lunch. And they looked around. And the oldest brother said, "Hey, which way did we come from? Which way are we going?" Well, they looked that way, but it wasn't that way. They looked over there, and they looked over there, and he said, "Oh, no, I think we're lost." They said, we need to find a place to stay if we can't find our way home, because it's going to get dark soon. When it gets dark, it's going to get very cold. Well, they searched and they searched. They tried to find their way back home, but they couldn't find anything. And so they decided they needed to find a place to stay. And they found an old dirt road. At the end of the dirt road, there was a house, a very big old house. Well, the oldest brother said, "Let's go and see if somebody lives there. Maybe we could ask if we could spend the night." And so he went up the front steps. And he knocked on the door. Knock, 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 knock. And the door opened up. He looked inside. He said, "Hello, hello, hello. Anybody here, here, here? Anybody home, home, home?" And then he heard the voice. And the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And he said, "Hey, who said that? Who said that?" But the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And the oldest brother went, "Wah!" And he ran outside and climbed up a tree. Now the middle-sized brother looked and he said, "Hey, what made that goofball run away?" He said, "You know what? I'm pretty brave. I'll figure it out." And so he went up the stairs. He looked inside the door and he said, "Hello, hello, hello. Anybody here, here, here? Anybody home, home, home?" Then he heard the voice. And the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." He said, "Hey, who said that? Who said that?" But the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And the middle-sized brother went, "Ah!" And he ran outside and climbed up another tree. Now the little brother was standing there and he said, "Wow, something made those two run away. Maybe I should figure it out." Now, he wasn't very big and he wasn't very brave, but he knew he had to figure this out. And so he went upstairs and he went inside the house. He said, "Hello, hello, hello. Anybody here, here, here? Anybody home, home, home?" And then he heard the voice. And the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And the sound was coming from that direction. So he went down a long, dark hallway. Down that hallway, there were big, thick spider webs. And there were all kinds of crazy spiders going on those spider webs. But he got through all the spider webs, and there was a set of stairs going up. He said, "Where did that voice come from?" Then he heard the voice again. And the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And it was coming from up the stairs, so up the dark, creaky steps. When he got to the top of the hallway, went that way and that way. And he said, "Which way do I go? Which way do I go?" And then he heard the voice. And the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And it was coming from that direction. So he went down a long, dark hallway. And on the wall, there were pictures of people. And those pictures looked like they were looking right at him. It was really creepy. And he got to the end and there were doors. One door there and one door there. And he said, "Which way do I go?" And then he heard the voice. And the voice said, "Bloody finger, bloody finger." And it was coming from that door. So he opened up the door and went inside. And there inside was a table and a chair and some books on the shelves. And he said, "Where did that sound come from?" And then from across the room, he heard the voice. And the voice said, bloody finger, bloody finger. And it was coming from across the room, because there was a door. And he went on over, and even though he was scared, he had to figure it out. So he went across and grabbed the doorknob, and he started to turn the knob. And as he did, he heard the voice, and the voice said, bloody finger, bloody finger. And he opened up the door, and there inside was a big green monster with great big green fingers. And the monster looked, and the monster said, bloody finger, bloody finger. Can you get me a Band-Aid? And the little brother said, sure. And he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a Band-Aid and put it around the monster's bloody finger. And the monster said, gee, thank you very much. And he asked the monster if they could spend the night. And the monster said, sure. And he invited them in and even made them milk and cookies. And they had a wonderful time and a wonderful night. And the next morning, they found their way back home. And when they got home, they told everybody the story about bloody finger. And that is the end. Now, I want to thank you all for having me here and for watching this video and for watching these stories. Thank you very much. I hope everyone has a wonderful and happy Halloween. I know this year Halloween's a little bit different, a little bit strange, a little bit spooky, but you know, not in a good way. But I hope you all enjoy this time, and I hope you enjoyed the stories, and I hope you had fun. I was Big Joe, your storyteller, and I hope you had a great time. Thank you very much, and have a very, very happy day and a very happy Halloween.